Yeah.
For those who have just joined, I am Holly Williams. I work for Joe's Blackbook in London, and we are going to be speaking with Anthony Cuthbertson, who is the Global Design Director for Topshop. So firstly, I wanted to thank all of you for joining us on session number 5. And thank you for taking the time to be with us. You know, these have been really interesting sessions. For the past 5 weeks, we've had different industry experts talking about different subjects, a little bit way of sort of like giving back, continuing to sort of network and connect with people so that nobody sort of feels alone and nobody feels that, you know, there's kind of no future out there, and just kind of so everyone can see a happy face, basically. I know that a lot of the people who have joined us are very familiar with Joe's Blackbook, but I'm also aware that there are what I would call newbies who I have recently connected with, thanks to our brilliant network, you know, have been invited to this session. For those of you that are less familiar, Joe's Blackbook, we are a company that really connects people. We deal with recruitment across the board within fashion and retail, from sort of creative through to merchandising and sales, from all levels through to creative directors, to helping, you know, people right at the beginning of their career start their journey. We obviously have our scholarship fund where each year we support currently schools in the US with students, helping them with their final year collection, where we give $10,000 to both men's and women's designers. So Joe started Joe's Blackbook over 10 years ago. He had a very successful tenure in recruitment at Abercrombie & Fitch. We have grown, we have offices in New York, LA, London. I've been with Joe for coming up to 4 years now. And like I said, you know, we're really just about connecting people, finding people jobs, and really helping people make good career choices. When this started, when the pandemic started, you know, Joe and Sean in our New York office, they really came up with the idea of holding these weekly sessions, like I say, to give back, to, you know, help people connect, and to really help people sort of sharpen their skills in different ways. When Joe asked me to hold one, the first person I thought was of Anthony. Anthony has got a very, very successful career, maybe spanning a couple of decades. He is currently, as I say, the Global Design Director at Topshop, and he will obviously tell us about what that role entails. His background includes Max Mara, Cavalli. You know, he's a very, very experienced creative director, design director. So, you know, I'm really appreciative that you're here to sort of share some of your insights. So, absolutely. Thank you. So, you know, really what I wanted to sort of start with, Anthony, if you could just tell us a little bit more about your background, the journey that you had. You know, you've worked in lots of different countries, different sort of levels of companies, from premium to accessible, luxury. So if you could just give us some of your sort of background on where you've been and where you are now.
Yeah, obviously I studied at the Royal College of Art. So at the time, the Royal College of Art, there was only 2 Masters of Art courses in the world, and one of them was the Royal College. And I had a great time there studying women's wear fashion for 2 years. And while I was at the Royal College, I was spotted by a couple of different designers at the time. There was a designer called Nicole Fahy, who was very big at the time. So they offered me a role to work with them as freelance while I was still at college. I was very lucky at the time that I worked with a couple of different mentors. One was Angela Quantrell, who was the buying director of Liberty's department store, a great influence in my life was another lady who Frances Mossman, who was part of the foundation of Next, and they really influenced, as well as the lecturers, especially Anne Tyrrell, who was really one of the British doyen of fashion, who I worked very closely with on developing collections. So I was there for about 2 years. At the time, I won the IWS competition, which was now the Wool Prize. And that really kind of started to kind of link me in with different houses. So with winning that prize, I got to work for 6 months with a designer called Romeo Gili in Milan. And so I did my summer working for him, went back to college, and carried on with my final collection. And I was offered a role with Max Mara. So I kind of, you know, from working in England, coming from the north of England, from a very small little town, to kind of, you know, then starting to work with international brands. So my career started in Italy, came back to London, where I headed up Dax, a quintessentially British brand. That took me working for Burlington in Germany and Van Lack in Germany, then coming back to the UK, where I worked with brands like Joseph, Amanda Wakely. Then my career moved to Australia, to the other side of the world as well. So I decided to move to the other side of the world for lots of different reasons, love being one of them. And then worked for a few different brands in Australia, from heading up the Webster Group, which owned 3 different brands, from Marks, David Lawrence to Jigsaw. Then I worked with Sass & Bide as their creative director, running that brand in Australia. And then at a time where my husband got offered a job back in the UK, we ended up coming back here, and I took up the role as design director with Roberto Cavalli, working with Peter Dundas, running the business for him at Cavalli for a couple of years. And then moved back to the UK to head up Topshop Top Man. So this is kind of where I am today. But, you know, through my career, it's been kind of, you know, working with, from luxury designer to high street. And as I've developed as a designer, it's moved from not only just doing ready-to-wear women's wear, but also looking after menswear, accessories, home and kids. So it's kind of, as I've developed through my career, I've kind of taken on other areas of businesses to then develop. So it became about managing brands and managing bigger kind of businesses and portfolios with different license divisions, as whereas, you know, I am today with Topshop, where we're working for a global brand with multi-channels of retail across the globe. And obviously within that, it brings lots of different challenges, because we work in many different ways. We work from kind of long lead, short lead, and then speed to market. So the teams that I have are working on 3 different deadlines constantly to develop the collections.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And I've got questions. I meant to say to everybody as well that's joined us, if there are any questions, please feel free to type them into chat, and we will either deal with them if we can as we go along, or we can have questions and answers at the end. I mean, Anthony, one of the things that, you know, I do think is quite rare about you and your background is the fact that you have been able to sort of adapt to very different environments. Mm-hmm. Obviously, language is a big thing, but, you know, we speak English, so, you know, we're lucky in that respect. But in regards to, you know, different cultures within companies, obviously Italy is very different to here in the UK, I'm sure Australia. How do you feel that you've sort of, you know, really been able to sort of fit into these different companies with success? Because, you know, there are a lot of people that do go from job to job, and, you know, there are a lot of challenges for people. So what would you say is kind of your answer to that?
I think obviously working in a different country brings lots of challenges. Obviously for myself, you know, especially in Italy, because you still find a lot of the people within the businesses don't speak English. So, you know, learning the language is really important. Like in our studio, we would be speaking French, English, Italian, in many fittings, in many situations. And, you know, I think for me, where I started my career, where obviously you know, I had to learn Italian, because at the time in 1995, it was very rare, but obviously within a company that there was a lot of English-speaking designers, where you go to, you know, at Cavalli, it was really a mix of international designers. So it was about communicating in many different ways to deliver what you need to do. And I think obviously, you know, that brought many challenges working across lots of different divisions. But it really kind of focused you on kind of delivering what you needed to deliver. And I think, you know, is businesses and cultural challenges, obviously there is different work ethics involved. You know, my team in Italy, the different, you know, we would be starting to come in between 8 and 9 in the morning, but we wouldn't leave until 8, 9 o'clock at night. And if it was kind of preparation for a show, that would carry on till between, well, let's say 1 o'clock in the morning in some cases. Because what we would do is we would work in many different ways. Even though we would be working on our sales collection and on a ready-to-wear collections, but then at the same time we would be working on the show collections. So in the show collections sometimes changed 2 or 3 times before it was finally delivered on the runway, which obviously brought many challenges, because as you start to develop collection and design ideas start to change, or direction starts to change, then you still have to deliver what you need to deliver. So my responsibility was to make sure that, you know, from a design team, that we were delivering the commerciality of the ranges for our merchandising from our sales perspective, but also bringing that creativity level of what we would produce, from, you know, the Beyonce lemonade dress to special couture pieces across the business, because it was so diverse, from couture all the way through to kind of gym and swim. Whereas moving to Australia, that was a big difference in culture, and also the way you think about how people dress. From coming from the Northern Hemisphere, where we definitely have seasons, in Australia it was very much kind of LA, where you don't have the dramatic seasons. And it was very much kind of, well, you know, Christmas time, we all dress up in a little bit of velvet, a little bit of sparkle, where there it's all about barbecues. And it's all about kind of being outside, the lifestyle's different, it's all about being fit and healthy, enjoying outside space. You know, in the design studio on a Friday, you know, the teams would be out the door by, you know, 3, 4 o'clock, so they could hit the last surf if they could. But it was very much about understanding the culture, because there wasn't any language barriers. But it was very much about a cultural understanding, because the country is very different in its demographic. And it's a melting pot of lots of different cultures. And you see that across from kind of Melbourne, which is very kind of Greek and Italian, where they settled, whereas kind of Sydney has much more of a English come Italian come Asian influence as well, because of the demographic mix of in the city. So again, it was really understanding taste, it was understanding what the customers really wanted, how they were living their lives. And I think that was really, really important, because it was a massive shift to what we know as normal in the Northern Hemisphere to going somewhere where it's a completely different way of living in some respects. Because it's much more outdoors and, you know, different occasions for different kind of products as well. But it was, you know, from a learning point of view, it really made it, you know, obviously as a creative person, you really grow because, you know, in every stage of my career, you're learning something.
Well, I mean, this is what it sounds like to me. And I think, you know, what a lot of us do try to sort of tell people when they are looking for new roles and new positions, it's very much about, you know, being adaptable, having an open mindset, and kind of it's about having no ego. So instead of going into a different company and thinking, you know the DNA of the brand and the codes of the house, but you actually, you know, a huge part of it is actually listening to what people are telling you and sort of slowly, you know, immersing yourself.
That's the first thing that I did in every brand, is to speak to people, because there's always your perspective, but then there's obviously the inner perspective of what a brand is about, or what its DNA is about, to understand the codes of a brand. So then you can start rewriting the codes to deliver a different proposition that feels contemporary, or, you know, more relevant. I think that's the key. You know, for today, it's really about making things that's more relevant. But, you know, I think it's about immersing yourself in the history of a brand. But then it's kind of like, what does that history look like today, to modernize it through advertising, right the way through to the presentation of the product and the type of product that you're delivering.
Fantastic. So, I mean, to flip this on its head, now you're at this point in your career where, and you have been for years, but, you know, you are the one building the teams.
Yeah.
You know, obviously building the design teams. I know you've got a huge input and point of view when it comes to merchandising, you know, the whole shebang. So when you know, you're looking at your team, your design team, and where the company is, how do you make those decisions of what the structure should look like, and what are the considerations from the business point of view that you're looking at? Obviously, you know, you're working Topshop, it's always been fantastically on trend. You've got, you know, boutique, you've had unique, you know, fantastic collaborations. How do you find out, you know, what it is you're missing, and then how do you put that into when you're out there looking for your next head of menswear through to, you know, design assistant? How does that work?
Well, I think depending on what area of the business, it's slightly different, because we work in many different ways. So if it's boutique and idol, we have the designer who works with me and works with the head of design, creates virtually the full collection. So they work on multi-products, whereas in other parts of the business, we have real specialist designers who's working on jeans or denim or jersey or knit. And the only reason why that is obviously because of the sheer volume of product that we're creating on a daily basis. It's, you know, you need specialist designers. You know, say for instance, the jean designer that we have, her role is really about, you know, I would say 60% of it is about creating the new washes with the mills. So we are first to market with all our washes, with all our treatments. Then it's about engineering those shapes. So we're really kind of creating something that is very unique to us. But when looking for the designer, it's obviously, you know, I'm myself and my senior team, we're obviously very involved together in regards to looking for that creativity, that commerciality, but then also a real personality that can fit within the brand. And, you know, because as a brand and as a designer, you have to sell your ideas, you have to sell your work. So it's really important that someone is quite vocal and also really has an understanding of what they're creating, their work behind it, so they can justify when we're working, because obviously when it comes to not only signing off all sketches and products, it's also I sign off on all the buys for the ranges and the grades of ranges and what will feature in the advertising campaigns, to what we're pushing is kind of, you know, our 20 key items of the season. So it's really working with finding those talents that has the attributes of the creativity, which is the most important, to the commerciality, which we can always tweak, and to the point of the communication. I think that's really important, trying to find talent that kind of fit into those kind of areas, especially when they're so specialist. When we're looking for, obviously, when we're looking for an all-round designer, which is something that I've kind of started to introduce, is kind of bringing in designers that are multi-product rather than just one product type, because they can bring something new to the table. It's quite refreshing. And I also think it's important where I try and move designers around in the team as well to push them. So eventually they become multi-product, which means then they can start to manage the teams and have much more knowledge about other category areas rather than just focusing on one maybe category area that they're working on.
Fantastic. And when it comes to sort of the process, because I know, you know, I think we've got quite a lot of people that have joined us that are, you know, they're at the earlier stages of their careers. Yeah. What is the sort of the process? Because obviously, and, you know, I know you very well, you know exactly what it is you're looking for when you're building a team. You're looking for this talent, but the commerciality and the culture fit. What is usually the process that takes part, though, when you put a search out? Does it always go through I mean, obviously you've got networks and word of mouth, which is crazy important and a godsend. But if you know, you're advertising, if you're using agencies, what is that process? Do you go through your HR team? And by doing that, can you sort of ensure that you're not missing out on good talent?
Well, we work in lots of different ways. We obviously support young talent, where we also bring in talent from an award that we do with the student bodies of the colleges. So again, we managed to bring young talent into the business at assistant design level. I and my head of design usually hand over a brief to our HR team. So we have an internal recruitment who then starts to kind of search under what we're looking for. Now, sometimes if that doesn't happen, then we reach out to agencies. And then it's also a lot of word of mouth in regards to kind of finding people. But, you know, for me, when I'm looking at talent, sometimes I prefer to, rather than let the HR team kind of review that first stage, what I like to do is look at a CV and work together. I don't like to see a CV by itself because I think it's very one-dimensional. I think it's the work that is the most important. And sometimes I feel that when you're looking through a resume, depending on where people's worked can, throw your judgment.
Yes.
And I think for me, it's all about the work and it's all about the talent. And I think I have worked with so many different designers who've come from so many different backgrounds because it was based on work. And what they presented rather than kind of, where they had worked or the time they had worked somewhere else. It was really based on what I was going to actually see and work with as part of the team. But also, what with the added bonus of technology, what we do now is not only do we have a resume and a representation of someone's work, but also they have the opportunity to do a little video.
Oh, wow.
So now what we do is they can, when they're presenting any of the work, they're asked as part of it if they want to present a little video. And it's just to it really shows who they are, personality straight away. And you can get a little bit of an idea of who you're going to meet rather than kind of reading something and then seeing something different. So it's really quite good to kind of then give a different point of view on the candidate, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I know. I think that's, amazing, terrifying for some, obviously, if you're, afraid of being viewed. But I mean, that is a huge thing.
I think also because of obviously, look at us today on, on Zoom. It's if I go back to, I remember my first interviews when I was moving to Australia. It was all on FaceTime.
Yeah.
Because, you have to meet someone, you have to talk to someone before they fly you out to then get a better understanding when it's face to face. So it became a tool of which, I think it's important nowadays because obviously we constantly use our phones, we constantly use different communication because, I've got friends, families all over the world. It's important to, work with that in association with who you are and your work as well.
I honestly, I love that, and I'll speak to you more offline about that. So, yeah. Because, you kind of answered my sort of next question already, but I know that a lot of time, when people are going through their career path, they're always looking to make this step up. So yeah. You've got to be very careful about, you're only going to get, well, maybe more so in the past, but you only get your next role from where you have been.
Yeah.
And, I know some of the most, talented designers that for whatever reason, they've worked for suppliers to the high street, to, Inditex, to super duper talented. Very few, and we've got some, lovely exceptions that we know then go on to make that step up into a more premium brand. Do you think that will change, or do you think that will always be something that people need to consider?
It's something that people need to consider. It's because I remember a person saying to me, "Oh my God, why are you moving to Australia? For goodness, why fashion doesn't happen in Australia?" And I'm like, you'd be surprised. If you think of Ellery, you think of Zimmerman, you think of Sassenbad, you think about all these different designers and Uggs and all these great brands. And I think because it was on the other side of the world and people don't really know about it, they were a bit kind of, oh, I'm not sure. And on a return, I landed a great role with Peter Cavalli. So it was about creativity and how you present yourself and your work. But I definitely think, some people have a certain path where they stay either in luxury or they stay within high street middle market. It really depends on where you get your break. And I think obviously, you have to really consider about the brand, but you really got to consider what you're getting out of it yourself. As a designer, because I think there's lots of designers who they're very, very creative. Without that commerciality, and they're not interested in that. But then there's other designers who really love that balance between creativity and commerciality, and really get a kick when they get those weekly figures coming through, and they can really see what is selling and how their product that they've created is kind of influencing fashion from a different level. So I think it's very important to consider any move that you make.
Yeah.
And it has to be the right fit culturally for you and for your handwriting.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. The handwriting is very important. Now, I love designers that can, are chameleons, that can blend themselves. I think that's because I'm kind of someone like that as well, that once I get into a brand, I can then develop and create. And, I've moved from softs to outerwear to kind of more casual. So you become multifaceted in your approach as designers, but a lot of people don't have that, they haven't had that opportunity until they start to grow. So I think it's really important to think about your move and the fit as well. I think that's super important.
I mean, we do a lot of work with, graduates through Parsons, Royal, St Martin's, and, obviously this is very, when they're very, very high caliber design talent.
Yeah.
And we also know there's thousands of other design schools out there. Once, these guys graduate, they're all going to be looking for their job. They all need to pay the bills. Bless them. What would you say? Should you really, really hold out and not go for, if you've always aspired to be more luxury or ready to wear, do you think in this day and age you should really, really hold out for that opportunity?
I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of certain designer brands in Milan, Paris and London, and even New York, in America, they tend to look at certain colleges for their talent, because probably, when I was at the Royal College, mostly, every major design house had people from the Royal College in their teams. From Vuitton to Marc Jacobs to Gianco Ferré to Armani, there was always someone from the Royal College in those teams that then linked them back to the college to look back for the talent.
Yeah.
So, and then obviously, I think that was obviously a real kind of link, which obviously helped a lot of people, but other people, I think, fashion is about creativity, and it comes from all different levels in the market. It doesn't have to be from a runway show or designer in Paris. It can be that creativity can come from lots of different things, from the most amazing denim brands to leisure brands to sportswear brands. I think there's lots of that, from children's wear, menswear, accessories. I think there's lots of different kind of, it's what I think, but what drives your passion, I think, is important. But at the end of the day, we all have bills to pay.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've actually, Joe Medved has actually just posted a question which kind of goes back to not necessarily to the individual, but in the way that the industry is working. Obviously, so, many large companies, your Zara's, H&M, Forever 21, are buying product directly from the factories, who, have, I don't know how, necessarily how it works for every individual. Do you do this with Topshop? And then how does that filter down and affect your in-house design team?
Well, we set the scene for the business. So we set the scene in regards to what is the big, so we create visual documents for all the buying teams, design teams within the business. So we are creating what are the big stories we want to talk about, because what we do is in our business is that every 8 weeks we are dropping 4 major big stories two at a big old store level and two at a top store level. And they are really stories that cover something from smart to casual wear to kind of runway collection ideas, and that information is really given to everybody in the business, so everybody knows exactly the stories, the color stories, the palettes, what we're going to be really following for the season. Then the design teams are obviously each designer, depending on what department they are in, they're really working very closely with their buying teams on presenting them on a weekly basis. Well, this is what we're working on. This is the range of sketches that we're working on. So there's no, there is a difference to what we're buying into. What we have to obviously maintain is the standard and the same level, so you keep the handwriting. So what we tend to do as well is when it comes to, because obviously print is obviously a massive driver in our business. So we have an in-house print team and graphics team that work on mostly, I would say, probably 60 to 70% print. And then we use exclusive studios around the world, from LA to Sydney to New York, all over the place, who work on exclusive prints for us as well. And then also we use a lot of vintage that we also give and influence our suppliers. So we're really kind of getting something that is very, very Topshop in its handwriting, and from what we buy to what we influence and design is a kind of a blend. So it's very kind of it doesn't look as different. It's very of the same handwriting. And then obviously we still, and even myself, I still visit a lot of the factories. I go with the teams to India. I go with the teams to Mauritius. The teams have to take my pen and pencil off me, because once I get starting in a factory, I start sketching. And, that's something I love, and I'm quite prolific. And, it's something that I still really enjoy and being part of, because I don't get to do it that often. But it's a great way of kind of being involved with the buying teams, reviewing everything. So when we see the product, we've got a good range that is a mix. Now, depending on the product type, depends on what we can buy from our suppliers. So say, for instance, in footwear and in bags, we design 100%. Because we can't get the level of creativity from our suppliers. Where on some things like socks, we could probably get a little bit, maybe some tailoring. Whereas we've got boutique, idol, anything unique or any collaborations, that's all designed in-house. We still have also an atelier of pattern makers, machinists who are super, super talented and amazing. That many designers, from J.W. Anderson to Christopher Kane, have all tried to poach people from us because there's such an amazing talent. But that creates a level in the business that we can't get from any of our suppliers as well. So, whereas we can take a sketch upstairs, we can get the pattern made within a day. Whereas if we're using some of our other suppliers, we probably would take 2 or 3 days to get to what we wanted.
Fantastic. And that's actually a really good point, you talking about sketching, because going back to, what we're saying about what you're looking for when you're building the teams, and once someone has sent in their CV and their little video audition tape, when it actually comes to the portfolio, which is, it's such a make or break thing. And a lot of it, can come down to personal taste, or different companies, different positions. But what is it that you really look for in a portfolio that you think sort of ticks every box?
I think obviously because we are working globally with lots of different suppliers from all over the world, the power of the sketch in regards to its clarity is the most important, because obviously that... And
by that, do you mean just like proper hand sketching, like me with my pen?
Well, no, it can be, I have a mix of designers who still hand sketch, They will do sketches on illustration. They'll do sketches on flat. They will do sketches in Photoshop, Illustrator. So everybody in the team works slightly different, but it's what the end result is the clarity of the sketch. So when we are sending a sketch to one of our factories, it's about the proportions of that sketch. Has the supplier understood it? And so if we showed that same sketch to 2 or 3 people, would we get completely different garments, or would we get the same kind of initial kind of idea, which obviously is super important because, you know, time is money. And so it's really important that on the sketch we really get the idea of what does that, you know, does it have a twin needle or a triple needle stitch if it's a casual garment? You know, what about the proportions of the collar? And this is something that, you know, we talk as a design team, because obviously, you know, the way we draw is our tool for the language of the business. So it's really important that that clarity is there with the drawings. And, you know, I think for me, when I'm looking at a portfolio, I'm looking for, there is obviously mood boards, there's obviously colour influence, there is a taste level, there is the clarity in the drawing, but then there's also, I like to see an expressive side of, you know, because I'm quite prolific myself, I like to see lots of ideas, and that straight away gets me very excited, because then I can see someone who has got the ideas, who can put the pen to paper and deliver on those kind of new products, because, you know, fashion is moving, or has moved so much, and the pace of fashion has moved so much, you know, from working where we work on collections where, you know, we would do seasonal collections, where now we, you know, me and my team, we're working on product from sketch into stores within 4 weeks.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
But the partnership is really there. You have to have the right partnership with the factory. And, you know, one of our amazing factories in Turkey, we will sketch. By the end of the day, that pattern and the garment will be ready almost. And within a day and a half, it can be sent to London. If we're not in Turkey, we can review it, we can decide and buy it.
But then what about sort of going back to the other companies that you've, you know, say at Cavalli, or, you know, or sort of luxury company, or even, you know, something premium, you know, like Sass and Bide, would they, obviously you're still looking for the same things in the portfolio and the ability to sketch, but do you know, is there more sort of like leeway, or are you still looking for the same things?
I'm still looking for the same clarity in the drawings, and the what I'm looking for is the ideas. And also in a, you know, a designer might, you know, I had one designer, an incredible talent, who worked with me, who'd worked for Marta Margiela, and Vuitton he couldn't draw.
Right.
But what he did was he presented his whole portfolio of photographs of working on the stand. And what he created was something that you would never imagine, you know, from working on a sketch to working on a 3D model is very, very different. And he created something that was so excited, I had to hire him. And I brought him in, and at the time we were at René Lazard in Germany. And we had a big design studio, and I was all right, okay, what do you need? He was like, I need 10, 15 mannequins, and I'll drape. And he created a range of different concepts, ideas about cuts, about shapes, about details, about gathering, that were almost kind of half creations of garments that were so inspiring and so easy to then hand straight over to the pattern maker to say, right, create, we like this, we want this to be X, Y, and Z. And we created some incredible styles from someone who delivered their ideas in a very different way from the norm. Mm-hmm. for me, it's about that creativity of, someone using lots of different ways to create the end, the ideas, because at the end of the day, it's about the product that we deliver. The process, sometimes we're very fixed in that, but we don't have to be. It can be different ways because I think bringing that to the table, having different people of different talents and different ideas can actually be very refreshing to a design team. And it can make people work in many different ways rather than just the norm of, sitting behind a Mac and sketching.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Bad ideas.
It's tricky because, you obviously have got a very good eye and a very knowledgeable eye. And you can read talent when it comes in many different forms, be it, the collage, be it the draping on the stand. Yeah. As a, just sort of going back to, as a, Mesa, as you said, sort of like boards showing your inspiration, obviously sketches, as you've said.
Yeah.
Do you think even, when it comes down to presentation, when someone comes in for a meeting with you, do you want to see their portfolio digitally? Are you happy for a physical one? Does that sort of, and I'm thinking even of the people that do the interviews before you, because obviously everyone goes through screening, what do you sort of think for people that aren't maybe interviewing with someone like yourself who's got so much knowledge? And unfortunately, we know there are people in the industry that don't have such an eye.
Yeah.
So as a sort of basic, it's kind of really, I always think it's just, you've got to show your path and tell your story.
Yeah, I think, obviously, now I would see something digital, again, with some kind of resume. But then what I also like to do is at that next stage of interview is see not just the same thing. I want to see something different, because then it really shows two sides to the designer, which is really, because I think it's great to show something tactile and something lived in and loved rather than something so flat when you see it in digital. Mm-hmm. And I think that also you get that sensibility of someone's eye for colour, for texture, maybe the way they've decided, or maybe it's just a notebook about, a different subject that they've created, so you get to know them as a person as well. So they add something else into, the presentation as well, because I think the idea of surprise is always really beautiful in their work. I remember when I was looking for leaving college and looking for that, I had a trunk.
Yeah, I don't suggest that people do that anymore, though.
It's the idea of showing the concepts of the creative ideas and and also I think what's really important is to understand the process of someone's thinking.
Yeah.
Which is really good, because then you can see how they've taken the journey from one idea to another.
Absolutely, but I do think at the same time, and this is me, talking maybe more as a recruiter, and obviously, seeing people on a daily basis. I think editing is a very important thing.
Definitely.
As well, whether it's editing for the job you're going to, editing for, truly including in your portfolio the work that you are really, really proud of, as opposed to just more is more, so I think that's, an important
projects that are, rather, because some people also, they present the work that where they're working, but they're not presenting something which is about them. And I think that's really important as well, to show more about who they are, because again, if you're looking at someone's resume and saying, oh, they work there, yeah, maybe they're not right. But then if you see something that is very much about them themselves, then you see things in a very different light. You see design in a very different light. So a personal projects, I think, is super important if you've got the experience of working in the industry. So you're not representing the work that you've already done. There's also another side to you as well. important.
And how do you feel, during the interview process? Do you insist on setting projects for your designers?
It depends. I'm a very passionate person. If someone walks through the door and I've already kind of looked at their work and then I'm re-looking at the portfolio, and as I'm talking, I can fall in love with someone.
Yeah.
Straight away. And I get that feeling because I can see the chemistry and I can feel how it would work within the teams, because personality and communication is super important. Whereas some people, if I can't decide between a couple of candidates, then I would set a project. And then kind of really understand those projects, but then also bring the candidate in to present the project rather than just being very visual. Because I think when someone talks about their work, it's very different to seeing something flat. And visual is one thing; words bring something to life. So I think it really depends on kind of who you meet for a certain role. And obviously, what I do as well is, my senior team would already have seen certain people, but, sometimes depending on what I have on my schedule, I'll meet everybody from a design assistant all the way through to a head of design. For me, it's all about making sure we've got the right fit, and the most important is getting that young talent within the business that's going to drive it, because new ideas, different way that we live very differently. Every week, me and my team, we kind of, we meet for a breakfast, and, I encourage the design assistants to say, right, what is our, give a new topic of today. If it's right, who are we looking at Instagram? Because there's a lot, we all look at different people. So it's really important to get all those influencers. So then everybody's kind of starting to look at what everybody else is looking at, because we might see a new trend. We might see something else rather than just looking in one direction. We're actually looking more 360, which is super important.
Perfect. So really, again, it's just going back to that open-mindedness.
Completely.
Kind of being adaptable. So I'm very aware of time, but I just sort of wanted to kind of finish off, and there's loads that we haven't touched on that I would have loved to, but time is not our friend. But I know, there's, especially, internationally, there's a lot of people at the moment that are, obviously furloughed. They are going to possibly be looking at redundancies. There is going to be a shift in, the future of retail, be it luxury, be it mass market. It's affecting everybody.
Yeah.
What would you say, sort of like post this immediate situation we are in, and as we move forward through COVID, where do you sort of see the future and the changes for the future?
I think obviously there's obviously a lot of designers, department stores globally, everybody looking at kind of the timing of when we drop collections. And phase collections, because obviously the norm of the consumer today is to wait for Black Friday or the Boxing Day sale. So obviously that's going to be a big shift. I think obviously product is going to be number one. It has to be different. It has to have value, which is going to be super important. I think brands like ourselves, obviously, where I think some people, unfortunately, have they're fallen on problems is obviously depending on their locations and where they're manufacturing. So I think there'll be a real recess in regards to, longer lead products to shorter lead products, and but then that comes with its own challenges as well, because if you're making closer to home, obviously there is price implications, but then obviously at that time, I think more people are aware about where product is coming from. So I think it's really important that people look at their manufacturing hubs to support the businesses. So they really they're looking at it in very different ways. So it's much more being reactive, especially at the high street level. Designer level, obviously, they're you know, with the shift in what's about to happen, where you know, Paris Fashion Week, Menswear Fashion Week will all be kind of put on hold in its normal ways of presentation, but there's new ways of communicating, there's new ways of presenting the collections, because there's still a hunger for people to shop. You know, even though all our stores are being closed, our, you know, online business is up triple digits. So the demand for people to still dress. Now, obviously in that, with us kind of being, a lot of us being at home, obviously that means that our needs are different. So obviously loungewear, casual wear is a big player, you know, but soon as we come out of this, everybody's going to be wanting to dress up. They're going to need to go to a party. They're going to be inviting their friends around. So that positive thinking as well. And also some people just want to dress up at home. And so I think there's going to be a real shift in, obviously, bricks and mortar stores, which we've known for a long, long time. The focus obviously online, but obviously that service is going to be really super important to deliver the proposition and the product to consumers faster than it's ever been. I think the luxury end of the market, you know, the craft will be super important. So the work behind that, we've seen, you know, over the past couple of weeks where Dior have been presenting on their Instagram all the ateliers at home, still creating, still present, but showing the craft of how the product is made. And I think that's so from both ends of the market, you've got one end which is really focused on how the product is executed. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum, where it's been all about mass and volume. And I think there will be definitely a pullback. And that will be really about kind of re-looking at what we need, you know, within the business. Because, you know, I think there will be obviously the reaction of people going back to how we normally shop. I think people have realized that they don't need as much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really going to affect on, you know, how we're producing, where we're producing, and what we actually put on the floor. And I think it's more about content, and it's more about kind of creating, especially in stores, it has to be much more of a new immersive experience that sells a dream. And creates a space that is unique to get people into the shops, because I think that's the only way of getting people into stores, is creating something that is special, and the need to be in this place to then start to shop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, for people that are worried about the future, it's just an opportunity to realise, you know, things are going to change, but change in a lot of ways is a very positive thing. And you just need to be able to embrace it and, you know, look at the new. And I think for, you know, especially for graduates, and I feel for them across the board at the moment, it's a really worrying time. But, you know, we've been through recessions in the past where, you know, things have looked terrible, and we bounce back. I think it's just about being strategic.
And creativity is what drives fashion, and that creativity across all channels is super, super important, from not only design in clothing, but e-commerce, in everything related to how we present the total package is super, super important. I think, you know, it's for me, it's really about kind of reassessing how we're packaging the whole kind of proposition.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Like I say, we'll need to finish shortly, but I personally have found it very interesting what you've got to say. We do have just a few questions that have come in, and I'll just touch on a couple of them.
Yeah.
I think sort of going back more onto sort of like your team and where you are at the moment. How international is your team at the moment? And how do you think, even, you know, with your knowledge and your peers in sort of like different companies across the world, I mean, how international is Topshop? I know that with, you know, Cavalli, wherever it is at the moment, always had very international teams.
Yeah.
Do you still, you know, are you still looking outside of the UK to employ people?
Most definitely. I think, you know, for us, obviously the biggest issue with is visas for international, because obviously, you know, in other countries there are forms of sponsorship to bring people in, and within the creative it's a little bit more challenging. We have at Topshop a really diverse team from all over Europe. So we have a lot of Scandi designers who are in my team. I've got Italian, Chinese. It's a real mix of melting pots to come together. And I think that's really important, because the mix is super, super important with any team, because it brings different cultures together, but also it brings different diverse kind of ideas as well, and different ways of working. I think, you know, obviously, there will be, at this moment, there's obviously going to be more restrictions in regards to, you know, designers being able to move around and work in different locations. But I think, you know, I think the mix is so important to have that diverse of different thinkers together and creating something that is really global.
Absolutely. And then just one last thing, which I guess this may change as well. Someone's asked, is Topshop thinking to go into a sustainable path?
This is something that we've been working on probably over the past year. Which is really important to us. Obviously, we've had a real focus on our denim, where we have been really focusing on working. The key thing is working with our suppliers. So we've been working very closely with all our denim houses to reduce the amount of water that we're using in our denim. You know, working on with organic cottons, working with kind of how we're processing, obviously even down to, you know, trying to, you know, removing plastic bags from the business as well. So we're looking at it as a more holistic view across the whole business. That's also related to product. We launched nearly a year ago our vegan shoe range. That's been very, very successful. We've moved that now into bags. Obviously, depending on manufacturers, it's been challenging. We're also working with incredible mills in India on rose petal, aloe vera, fabrications as well, which is really exciting. So again, looking at lots of different sources, but, you know, I think it's also about kind of really, really focusing on kind of the amount of product we're making as well. And I think that's also, we've worked with a lot of vintage studios, vintage dealers as well, because I think that's super important as well for people to, as we've seen with kind of the launch of Depop, the mix of kind of vintage with something new, because I think that is really the kind of the mix is the most important, and the value, because obviously, you know, from someone who buys a huge amount of vintage product, what we do now is we sell it back, because it's becoming harder and harder to find all those beautiful special pieces. And some studios rent them, but now it's easier to sell it back rather than going into our kind of chain where it kind of it sometimes gets lost.
Fantastic. So it's always, again, just looking at ways to push things forward for the future.
It's always, it's thinking about how, it's also thinking what is relevant today. How are people shopping? What do they need in their lives? You know, what is, you know, I think it's important to think about that, you know, the environment is super, super important, from, you know, the water we use to the fabrications to use to the people who make the product as well, is that has to be a real focus point for any brand.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Anthony. It's just been like I say, for me, so interesting, and I know that our audience would have, you know, gained a lot from it as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and I will meet you very, very soon for a big hug and a drink when we can. And everybody else says thank you as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Anthony. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.